I just wanted to make an announcement. If you're interested in the publication, the Conservation International publication, Perfect Storm, it's available online in English, in Spanish, and in Portuguese at the Conservation International site. So just visit there. And I think there is a way, if you search our site also, you can link it. You can find a link to it there. Now, I would like, let's reconvene then in this panel where we have three Brazilians talking about focusing on the subject of this conference from a Brazilian perspective, and to present and moderate the event, I have the honor to introduce to you Mr. Ricardo Gandur, who is the director, the managing editor of O Estado de São Paulo. We have, obviously, Dr. Carlos Nobre, the leading climatologist in Brazil, and a person that has been really doing the work, the very difficult work of monitoring deforestation for a good number of years, maybe 2 decades or more, from the National Institute of Space Research, and my friend Pedro Barra from WWF, who is the director of the Amazon project. And I learned today soon to start moving back home and to continue to do the good work he does here, to continue to do that work in Brasilia. Ricardo.
Thank you, Paulo. Good afternoon, everyone. In the last 5 years, the devastation in Amazon corresponds to the territory of Portugal. It also corresponds to 17% of the whole extension of Amazon land. The forest movements 1.5 billion of tons of dioxide of carbon per year. Under those headlines, O Estado de São Paulo published on November last year a special edition in a magazine format, which is available to the door of this session, in parallel with other 6 special editions regarding environmental and climate issues, themes that are priorities on the newspaper's editorial topics. The mission, of course, of the newspaper is to bring the debate, to stimulate the debate, to hear all the positions, governmental, non-governmental, private, public, and try to help the country and the Brazilian society to better understand that region, which we believe is the best path to find the solution. So more than fortunate coincidence bring us together this afternoon. Paulo Sotero, a former correspondent of O Estado de São Paulo in the United States, now manages the Brazil Institute of Woodrow Wilson Center. It's more than a colleague, he's a friend, and thank you very much, Wilson Center and Paulo, to make this afternoon possible. When the initiative of the newspaper comes live in Washington, D.C. through the 40 best pictures that illustrated that special magazine edition in a special exhibition will be opening this afternoon this evening on 6 p.m. And later we'll be traveling to other places in the United States and also in São Paulo very soon. So just a quick words to again thank you very much to the Woodrow Wilson Center the opportunity of being here with you, and passing the word to Carlos Nobre. We will start this session. Please, Carlos.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon to all. Thank you, Ricardo, for the introduction. Thanks also to Paulo Sotero and Brazil Institute for this very important initiative, because really we have to face that if we don't discuss infrastructure in the Amazon and sustainable development, we are never going to get anywhere. Always these two communities have been in opposite camps, fighting most of the time. It's healthy to fight, and the fight will continue because they come from very different views, theoretical views on development. However, it's very important to provide a forum for these ideas to be discussed. I was not sure what to talk about, so my presentation is a little bit of a mixed bag, but I think I will highlight some issues. Well, I'm working scientifically for many years on the first topic here, and too bad that Tom Lovejoy had to leave, because in fact some of these science results that I'm going to show were prompted about 15 years ago by a question. Tom posed a question to myself, to Professor Salati in Brazil. What's the level of deforestation? Is there a tipping point for deforestation? Is there a level of deforestation that if you go beyond, then the forest will never recover? So this is a theoretical, very interesting scientific question in itself. Then I will make a few remarks on infrastructure and drivers of deforestation, which is completely obvious, but still I want to make a few remarks. And finally, I want to end with some ideas that the scientific community in Brazil is starting to discuss as a way out of this dilemma. Is there a tipping point in the Amazon? So this is becoming not important only for the Amazon, but because of the climate crisis, and understanding the integrated functioning of the Earth system as a whole, and tropical forest is part of that Earth system, is becoming crucial. I think after IPCC 2007, it's pretty well demonstrated that we humans are responsible for global warming, or for substantial part of global warming. So what's the next big scientific challenge before us, the scientists? It's really understanding tipping points. It's crucially important to understand what's going to happen to the ice sheets, what's going to happen to the Arctic Ocean, and biological systems as well. So I don't want to give you a long theoretical introduction, but I just want to highlight a few aspects where we need to improve our understanding. Basically, we entered 200 years ago in the industrial era, what Professor Paul Crutzen coined this new term, Anthropocene. It's not a truly geological area, but it's 200 years slice in time, very short for planetary evolution purposes, however, as important as any other geological era. And so, understanding Earth's system is really understanding a very complex, non-linear system, and how the non-linearities
change behavior of the system, sometimes abruptly. It's also understanding that the oceans, the atmosphere, the vegetation, the global carbon cycle is part of one whole. It's integrated nature of the planet. And these interactions between those components generate a number of feedbacks. Some are very complex, and some we understand very little about. And more complexity is brought about by the fact that we have to realize that we are dealing with intrinsically coupled socio-ecological system. So we are part of the system. We are not observers of the universe or observers of the system evolving. We are integral part of this system, and we are responsible as climate, global warming is showing us for a great deal of these new possibilities, new trajectories, new states in the system. Are there tipping points in the Amazon that we should not cross? Of course, crossing or not crossing tipping points, and tipping points that are generated by our actions, is a humane decision. So it goes into the realm of ethics more than anything else. So, for instance, deforestation, global warming. So we have to develop a better, a solid knowledge base on these conditions, the boundary conditions, as we call, for Amazon or for that matter, planetary sustainability. And of course, our governance and management structures all evolved over the time, a very long time, evolved practically to provide the best environment for humans. And then nature was outside factor that we thought we could always to control. So this is a little bit of theoretical background just to get to the point, and I will review very briefly because I don't have much time, a possibility of tipping points in the Amazon. So recently, scientific studies indicated there are two stable states, and I'm sorry if I use a little bit of jargon of complex system theory, but stable states meaning that you can have, for instance, in the case I'm showing you here, you can have forest, green, and the climate, and you can have green, it's forest, savannas, dry shrublands. You can have, this is the current situation in a very coarse resolution. So this is a stable state. It's there for 10,000 since the end of the last glacial period. But we found out that you also could have another equally stable state in which you replace most of the eastern central Amazon by savanna. So these are equally not probable because nature decided to follow this trajectory, but if that state is reached, then it will become stable. It will be there. So this is what some of us have called savannization of the Amazon. Large parts of the Amazon, eastern Amazon, becoming impoverished savanna. It's not the biologically rich savannas of subtropical South America. So basically, now there is a theoretical interest in looking whether if you push this stable equilibrium represented by this trough, the valley, over this ridge, and the height of this ridge is called resilience of the system. What's the push? How far, how strong you have to push to change the equilibrium? So this, of course, there is a theoretical interest, but I think there is some practical applications if we understand this process well. So we need to advance our understanding of these critical tip points or hotspot systems at risk. The Amazon is a system at risk. Globally, the picture remains relatively scanty. We have a very limited knowledge, things here and there. And, these tipping points, in general, they are unpredictable. see, for instance, the ozone hole over Antarctica. That was completely unpredictable. So we know a little bit of some possibilities, but there are a lot of tipping points which are maybe well hidden. Okay, I will review very briefly two ways of changing this equilibrium in the Amazon. One is deforestation, and the other one is global warming. But I just want to tell you, as drivers of change in the Amazon, but fire is as important, perhaps even more important. We don't have a good quantitative basis of modeling fire to use in those studies. This area is advancing very rapidly, but still we haven't gotten there. And droughts, there's natural climate variability, a sequence of severe droughts that might change the vegetation of the Amazon for good, coupled to all these other drivers. Land use and land cover change. These are experiments that we do on a computer model. The computer model, mathematical model of the climate system, is, in a way, it's not different than the models used for global warming, for scenarios of climate change due to global warming. However, this is slightly simpler models. And then what we do is we simulate what would happen to the climate of the planet if we progressively deforest the Amazon, so you have 100% forest all the way to 100% whatever you want to simulate the change to be. In the case of this experiment, I'm going to show the result very briefly. It's only pastures and soybeans, of course, for the obvious reasons that that's one type of land use change common in the Amazon. So what I'm showing you here is the rainfall change, relative change in rainfall. And these are seasons of the year. Let me just say June, July, August, September, October, November. This is for pasture. This is for soybeans. In summary, what these results are showing is that during the dry season, pastures, there is a reduction of up to 30% of rain, and for soybeans, up to 40% of rain. I don't have time to explain the details why those results happen that way and why soybeans cause stronger drying in the Amazon. But the take-home message of these simulations is very simple. If you, and following on the very nice presentation by Tim, which was a fantastic introduction for me, it's if you increase the dry season dryness, basically increasing the length of the dry season, you turn the forest into savannas. And then, just to make sure that that was the case, we carry out, and you're going to see a little bit more of this type of result. This is a vegetation model: forest, savannas, cutting or dry shrubland. So what we did is for 20% deforestation. This is relative to the previous result, but now we put, this is the vegetation, and this is pasture or soybeans, and this is the equilibrium biomes that we would have if we deforest 20% and then let the system find its own natural equilibrium. Just deforest, stop deforestation, stop agriculture, and see how the system will, if the system will bounce back to forest. It's a very important question, scientifically, to ask. And then we conclude that by the time you deforest 40%, then the system does not go back to equilibrium. Basically, the savannas will dominate the eastern Amazon. So from these calculations, one might come with a very rough first figure for this tipping point. That is 40% deforestation, mostly concentrated over eastern Amazon. So that's the first one. And then another way, this is slightly more complicated, but I will try to simplify. In this calculation, we just, what we do is just we start with a very, it's a simulation. We can do whatever we want. We start with the forest covered by green, by all South America covered by forest. And then we start putting a little bit of, in this case, a semi-desert, just to see. And then we let the system iterate, and then we try to find what would be the equilibrium vegetation. And when you do that, this is number, let's say 5, it's here. So this is initial area of forest, which is 100%. And then final area of forest is 97%. So you recover all the forest here. And then when you do that, up to number 1, which is all the Amazon replaced by some other vegetation or no vegetation. And then you recover 80%, less than 80%. So what I want to tell you here is that up to 40%, this is not much change. And then there is a profound, significant change from 40% onwards. So this 40% figure comes back in this different calculation, which is trying to find the equilibrium between deforestation and what would be the ultimate recovery of vegetation. So for that, 40% seems to be, this is still preliminary, but to my knowledge, that's the first time we are getting those figures. As you say, for instance, global warming, don't let the planet warm up more than 2 degrees. I mean, this is an arbitrary qualitative figure, but why? Because, apparently after 2 degrees, the impacts will be mostly negative and to some extent catastrophic if you keep warming the planet. So this 40% might be upper limit for deforestation before you move to savannas mostly over eastern Amazon. Global warming is very important. What global warming does to the Amazon? We would certainly like to answer that question because even if we take deforestation to 0, then there is global warming going on. And global warming certainly can affect the forests. The problem with the current understanding of scenarios is that there is a lot of uncertainty. These are 15 IPCC model scenarios. This is for high emission scenarios. This is for low emission scenarios up to the end of the century. But you see here up to 4 degrees, 5 degrees warming, very, very large warming. I mean, this is 5 degrees warmer. This is another world for these high emission scenarios. So we also asked the question, what's going to happen in the Amazon, in a warmer planet? However, the problem is that this is rainfall. And then you have scenarios that show more rain, less rain. So it's still, this uncertainty is limiting our ability to come up with good advice on what's likely to happen to the forest in response to global warming. However, we have 15, 20 such scenarios. So what we do, we see what would be the equilibrium biomes, forest, savanna, etc., for 15, all these 15 models. And there is, this is the famous Hadley Center model. This is the famous Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory here in the US model. And there's models from all over the world. This is the control, the potential vegetation, the natural vegetation. See, this is the rainforest. I mean, it's not there anymore. This is the vegetation that is in equilibrium with climate, not the current land use or land cover. But the message that you get from looking at these 15 scenarios is that in general, and I will explain here, if you go for the high emission scenarios, the message is by the end of the century, all these red areas become savannas. These yellow areas are in the process of becoming savannas, and probably by 2200 would become savannas if global warming continues. And this area remains as forest for at least 200 years, 100 years and even more. So the message is, you only looking, from deforestation point of view, there is a risk of savannization. From global warming point of view, this is significant warming. As I mentioned before, this is 4-5 degrees warming. So probably another tipping point you can say, don't cross the boundary to 0.5 degrees in the Amazon. So you're risking to rapidly turn the forest into savannas. 4 degrees, certainly a large part of the forest would become savannas. Those things are acting synergistically. They are acting at the same time, and we are not considering in these calculations fires. If you add fire, you really add fire to the problem. You become explosive. So be careful. Let's be careful. And have we crossed this tipping point yet? I don't know. I can't tell you. I hope not. I hope not. Otherwise, a lot of the things that Tim told us about conservation policies, etc., will be really useless because the system will follow the trajectory and will find this new state. Few minutes only, because this is well known, and Tim also mentioned at length. Of course, infrastructure and drivers of land use change are they have 100% correspondence, not even 90%. So if you look at this is work of my colleague from NIPI, Diógenes Alves, but basically, sorry, this is in Portuguese, but it's very simple. 90% of all deforestation in the Amazon happens within 50 kilometers on each side of the main roads. This is well known, well established, and when you pave the road, when you open the road, there's a peak of deforestation. When you pave a road, there is a second peak of deforestation. This is well known, well established, and it follows a very, very clear logic. If you open up a road, then people can go there and deforest. So there is a big, major challenge, really, in this transoceanic north-south and pipes, natural gas pipes, water pipes, whatever, you name it. Infrastructure is associated with aggressive and progressive land use change. Fires, of course, this is also as much related to deforestation, to roads as deforestation. I just want to show you a very simple calculation. Now, this is also a colleague of mine from NIPI, you can represent, this is a probability of fire, you can represent about 90% of all the fires in the Amazon just by two indicators. One is dryness, precipitation, so basically dry season, and the other one is distance to the main roads. So distance to the main roads explains deforestation, explain fires very well. So if you want a very simple model, 2-parameter model for fire, those are the 2 parameters. So certainly infrastructure and roads in that sense are critically important. And you have this figure on the inside of the back cover of the brochure that you all received. Very important project, Amazon Scenarios project. This is the paper by Soares Filho in Nature 2004. And of course, what's the predictability in the system is roads. I mean, where you have roads, and then you have, including a little bit of transoceanic, and you have deforestation. That's projected deforestation by 2050. This is what they call governance scenario. That's the most optimistic scenarios, but still that's a lot of deforestation. So, I mean, it's very clear, it's established empirically, infrastructure has been leading to deforestation in the Amazon. Okay, let me now move on just to say a few words on the need of a new and sustainable model for the tropics. And in this model, it should not preclude infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure is a given. Being realistic, being pragmatic, there is no way to prevent the roads from crossing the Amazon all over, from north to south, from east to west. Energy. Tapping the hydropower of the Amazon is an inevitable, and all these countries need more and more energy. Hydropower, with all the problems that hydropower can bring, as far as the dams are concerned, still mitigates climate change to some extent. Biofuels, this is another source of energy, which to some extent can mitigate climate change. It's not trivial, as Tim has pointed out, but can mitigate climate change to a certain extent. So all those things, apparently they will happen, they are happening, and so the question is to see if there is any way to make infrastructure development more compatible with conservation. Okay, just a few more things. as you know, deforestation, this is deforestation also on the inside of the back cover. You have these graphs. There's a different format, but it's the same numbers. Deforestation rates from my institute, INPE. So everybody's happy. Minister Marina Silva is cheering. The deforestation decline over the last 3 years. This figure is slightly revised upwards. This is 11,000 square kilometers, but from a very high 27,000 square kilometers to 11,000 square kilometers. So everybody is happy. What's going on? Is it economics driving declining deforestation, price of commodities? Is this government law enforcement becoming more effective? Nobody knows. If a scientist comes here and tells you that I know the answer, probably that's not true. It's a combination. It's a combination of government measures starting in 2005 in the aftermath of the assassination of Dorothy Stang in Pará. Also, law enforcement. Marina Silva is very serious about that. So there is some law enforcement. There is some deforestation decline due to prices of commodities. So the question is this trend, can this trend be continued into the future? This is a big question. Deforestation in the last 4 months in the Amazon, I can tell you because my institute is providing that data to government, has exploded. August, September, October, November, December. Over 6,000 square kilometers have been deforested in the last 5 months, close to 7,000. And this is not the month, the time of the year where most of deforestation takes place. Usually it's in the first half of the year. So there is some things going on. And just to give some, it's another way, this is declining deforestation. I just emphasize what Tim said about the ecosystem service value of that. My calculation is slightly different than Tim's, but we end up pretty much at very large numbers. Only if this could be sold to the carbon market, which cannot because there are no mechanisms today, that's equivalent to something $2 billion worth in a relatively low value of $10 per ton of carbon. So there is a lot of potential in only one ecosystem service. And these calculations, when you decrease deforestation, we call this calculation triple 50. Why triple 50? Because if we reduce deforestation by 50% up to 2050, we avoid emissions of 50 billion tons of carbon. So that's triple 50. Very simple calculation. And just to highlight how important is reducing deforestation globally, and this mitigation, 50 gigatons, is equivalent to 10 to 15% of the targets for stabilizing the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So it's a very important contribution coming from forestry. It's reforestation can also be important, but just reducing deforestation is the most important contribution coming from tropical countries. Biofuels are no panacea. Also, Tim mentioned that, and I fully agree. They are no panacea. They are coming. They will expand. They are expanding. But one has to take into consideration, this is another calculation published recently in Science, that if you deforest, you're putting a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, 200 tons per hectare, and if you replace that same area with sugarcane ethanol, it may take 100 years to mitigate the same amount of carbon. In 30 years, this calculation is for 30 years, you mitigate only about 50. So, message, do not deforest to expand biofuels production in the global tropics. However, as Tim also pointed out, there is a huge area already deforested, low pasture, low productivity pasture. So there is room, perhaps, to find a space for biofuels, but I tell you, this is going to be difficult. If oil prices keep increasing, there will be an explosion of biofuel production in the Amazon. Contrary to government policy, Brazilian government policy is not to allow explosion of sugarcane or even biodiesel in the Amazon. But who knows? So we are always left with this problem, which is with us for a number of years. There is a reality in the Amazon. Agriculture, intensive agriculture, soy, timber, exploited in a very primitive, lucrative but primitive way, unsustainable. Cattle ranchers, which are becoming more effective, but still, I mean, the productivity goes from 0.3 heads of cattle per hectare all the way to 4 heads of cattle per hectare. So there's variability of, most of the Amazon cattle beef industry is low productivity. It's about 1 head of cattle per hectare, which is very low productivity compared to, let's say, southern central Brazil, Mato Grosso do Sul, which is about 4 to 5. And of course, there is this small agriculture, there is water, and there is biodiversity and environmental service. So we are faced with all these things going on in the Amazon. Some are activities very developed, aggressively pushing the frontier, and others are not developed at all. So we asked our question. I did not ask that question, but we are asking that question in Brazil since former ambassador Recupero put forth, in fact, in an article in Estado de São Paulo. You remember that, Ricardo? Very interesting concept. Very interesting. It's a provocative, thought-provoking concept. Can Brazil become an environmental power? Still, we have to define what environmental power is. It's different than agricultural power. So environmental power means that it's environmentally conscious. So a country which is very clean, a country which uses natural resources wisely. So we perhaps Brazilians, we would like to portray ourselves as environmental conscious and become environmental power. So use the wealth of natural resources that Brazil is endowed to leverage our development. So that's perhaps a goal. I'm finishing. And yes, tentatively, yes, I should answer, but if and only if Brazil can create a completely new paradigm for the sustainable development of the Amazon. And perhaps the only thing, although it's substantial, that I might not agree with team's assessment is that deforestation leads to wealth. I don't agree with that. I think it leads to wealth to very few people, yes. And leads to poverty to a large number of people, yes. But, I would not call what 95% of the rural population of the Amazon have as wealth. I mean, they barely survive. Human Development Index of the Amazon is second only to the interior, the hinterlands of northeast Brazil. It's the average of African countries. So, let's not call that wealth. Although, of course, it is economic activity, jobs, quote unquote, but not wealth. And however, that's the way the Amazon is being developed, but we need a new paradigm. We need to challenge ourselves for a new paradigm. And so basically, is there hope beyond the traditional model, which is progressing in the Amazon, and including at least beef production and intensive agriculture? Soy is becoming more lucrative, it's becoming more efficient over time. But that would mean it would doom the future of the Amazon, because it will simply replace the forest. And one should remember as well that the rural, what's the GNP of domestic of coming from these activities? Forest domain for Brazil. I don't know the figure for Bolivia, I know for Brazil. 0.5% of our GNP. So rural development in the Amazon is not bringing wealth to Brazil. Brazil, mineral sector in the Amazon is much, much larger. And I'm sure we are going to hear about energy. Energy will become much, much larger. So rural development of the Amazon is finding land to several million people, perhaps 7 million people. However, it's not making Brazil wealthier. That's important to remember. And then, is there a hope how to develop the Amazon sustainably? You know, basically, is there a room for small-scale agriculture, water resources, and primarily biodiversity and environmental services? And I just want to finish with some ideas we are discussing in Brazil, which are very tentative, and perhaps one way of creating some momentum to change the model, to create a new paradigm. And this new paradigm comes from the idea, the concept of bringing value, valorizing the heart of the forest, biodiversity. But how you do it? And what the problem, why is so difficult to develop a new paradigm? Simple answer, because there are no developed tropical countries. There is no model to follow. As you know, there is very little invention in the world. There are few successful inventions that everybody else copies. So, you know, no tropical countries can copy a successful model of development based on natural resources, sustainable use of natural resources. So that's why people simply follow, copy soy, beef, etc., etc. It's not only because there are global markets. It's also because there are no model to copy. So we have to invent a model. So a critical thing, if you want to invent something, if you want to send a spacecraft to Mars, you have to invent something. You have to invent rockets, spacecraft, the ways to keep people alive for years in space. So you create what? You create a big center of technology and research. You create NASA, and then one day you land in the moon, and perhaps one day we will land on Mars. So why you don't repeat that type of model? You want to do something, you create, you invent. So that's the idea that we are proposing. It's a group of people in Brazil. It's a small group within the Brazilian Academy of Science. We are conducting a study, and we finalized a study. The study is complex. I'm not going to go in all detail. I just want to highlight one element of this study that might help finding this new paradigm, which is what we call Institutes of Technology for Amazonia. The acronym is ITA. ITA is a famous engineering school in Brazil, and ITA was responsible for Brazil having a very powerful aircraft industry. So we use the same acronym just to mean that we can create the institutions, in this case education and research, to change the paradigm. So this institute, several institutes, one, let's say, dedicated to forests, another for aquatic resources, energy, renewable energy. But the idea is technological education, graduate programs, and advanced research, addressing specific areas. These are to be very small. It's not a huge university. Small, focus, 5 to 100 faculty size, 1,000 to 1,500 students. State-of-the-art research labs. That's very important. So we are, the Brazilian Academy of Science, we are proposing that. We are going to propose that to President Lula, ministers. We hope they like the idea. And also, it's a two-tier approach to R&D. So it's important to say. I think a big mistake people, when they think of sustainable development, biodiversity, based on biodiversity in the Amazon, they always expect to find the miracle drug. You keep hearing that. Media reports on that all the time. The miracle drug is hidden in the tropical forest. I think it's a little bit of it's a deception. I mean, there may be important drugs there, but you should not base the Amazon or tropical forest development on the possibility of one day finding this miracle drug or drugs. So the idea is very down to earth. One way, which is basically the development, to globalize, to make Amazonian products based on biodiversity, reaching the global markets. There is only 4 or 5 Amazonian products which are really reaching global markets. Make it 50 or 100. And if you're a good economist, you make a simple calculation, 50 or 100 products arising from biodiversity, reaching the global market. This is 4 or 5 times the product that you get from soybeans, beef, and timber. But you have to do it. And then you need a science base, you need appropriate technologies, you need very important capacity of entrepreneurship, which we're lacking in the Amazon, and full productive chain approach. This will be most of these institutes that we are proposing, because this is down-to-earth proposal. This is not something, miracle in the future. However, I think to be challenging, these institutes have to have a little bit or some of the high-end technology. So we thought of biotechnology, of course, and also biomimicry and the nanoscience. There are two areas that are becoming very important, the linkage between nanoscience and biology. So, and then we need international cooperation in all levels, education and fundamental and applied research. So when we hear about this infrastructure developments, billions of dollars flowing to develop roads, paving roads, energy, infrastructure, I think we have to have some thinking of this type of institutes of technology is basic infrastructure. Should be seen as important as energy and roads. We don't see that in Brazil. Very few countries in the developing world see education at that level as infrastructure. South Korea saw that 25 years ago. You see what South Korea is today. Brazil still does not see it. Part of Brazil does, but this is a developed part of Brazil. But the Amazonian Brazilian does not see that as infrastructure. But since we're here, we're talking to the bank, international banks, we should see that as infrastructure. How much does that cost? I will finalize with this figure. Over 10 years, our calculation for 3 such institutes of technology, $2 billion. So it's $200 million a year. Is this a lot of money? No, it's not a lot of money. It's very little money to create the possibility of this new paradigm, which I'm sure increases the possibility, the probability of the Amazon being sustainable. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Carlos. Carlos is one of the most important Brazilian scientists. And before giving the stage to Pedro Barra from WWF, I'd like to inform you all that, to invite you to visit the website of O Estado de São Paulo. www.estadão is estadao.com.br. ESTADAO. Your comments, interactions, and letters and messages are very welcome, and it's another channel to be updated about Brazil and Amazon, especially. Please, Pedro Barra.
Thank you, Paulo. Thank you, the organizers. Thank you, Paulo. Thank you, the organizers. It's a little while. There I go. I'm going to start by defining better the title of my presentation. In some way, it starts from where Carlos has ended. I think we have this bolstering the value of the Amazon is the title. This is one of the components of our Amazon-wide strategy, or WWF Amazon-wide strategy, but I'm not going to talk about the Amazon-wide strategy. I'm going to talk about bolstering the value of the Amazon, because if we don't bolster the value of the Amazon, there's no way, If the clear land has a higher value than the extending forest land, so algebra tells us the forest has a negative value, right? If the clear land has a higher value, right? So if we don't bolster the value of the Amazon, it's going to be like swimming against the stream, right? There is no way. Macroeconomically speaking, there is no solution, right? The opportunity cost is too high. The the tendency or the propension, the idea to convert is so high that you're going to convert, right? So that's my first pitch, and probably my most important pitch, is bolstering the value of the Amazon. And I'm going to start going backwards 10 years. I'm going to backwards to the time where the Brazilian National Development Bank, BNDES, did the first terrestrial study of opportunities to invest in infrastructure in Brazil. A terrestrial planning is a little different from a sector planning where you plan education, health, transport, energy, blah, blah. No, terrestrial planning, you try to look at all the dimensions at the territory. And you have to act at the territory, looking at all the dimensions. That was the idea. That's the idea of the terrestrial planning. That's the idea behind this study. And this study was the seed of IIRSA. So I'm going to, as said, I'm going back to this background vision. This study has that vision of Brazil 10 years ago. It was developed by BNDES, and it was done by a consortium led by ABN AMRO Bank, Booz Allen, and Bechtel Corporation. And the vision was based in a discussion, in an interdisciplinary discussion group of the future of Brazil, given global drivers. No? And this was based in 4 references. One was The Clash of Civilizations, the epic of Huntington, Commanding Heights, The Battle for the World Economy, The Rise of the Network Society, and the Agenda 21. So that was more or less the scenario 10 years ago, right? I'm going to simplify a lot. And there was a discussion and here I'm simplifying and trying to look at these global drivers today, right? And I'm calling the first one identity, corporations, information and knowledge, and Agenda 21. This is an exercise. It's an oversimplification of the reality, but each one of you will say, no, I think identity is probably higher today or equal. Corporations are higher as a driver. Information and knowledge is higher. I don't know. So important as the answer is are the arguments behind your position, right? That was the idea of the discussion. So my pitch is that the identity is higher. Corporations are more or less equal. I would say with all the terrorism, all the state is not dispensable. Energy, so the state is probably more powerful now in the States. The corporations are equal. I would say information and knowledge, that was the point of Carlos, is much higher now. And Agenda 21, I would say, is well down the global agenda now. At that time it was, and we started study just after Rio +5, so it was quite a hot issue. And the Amazon. What about the Amazon? That's another. I'm trying to do the same simplification. What's the potential to transform the Amazon based on identity, corporations, information, knowledge, and the Agenda 21? What do you think about? My thoughts were that identity is low. I thought in indigenous people. I think the indigenous people, the community reserves are in defense now. If they could keep their land, it's going to be great. But I'm not sure they are able to transform the reality. Corporations, yes, I think they are. And information and knowledge, for sure. They can change the reality. And Agenda 21, I would say, I'm looking at Agenda 21 as the government, as more government public policies or international conventions into the sustainable development realm. So that's my idea. That was my idea. But that was 10 years ago. There are new drivers or references, right? That's for sure. One is these new drivers. One is China. But I'm not putting China because it's China, because China is the best example of the emerging market, emerging countries. Emerging countries now represent 45% of the global product. It's a lot. So China is a good example of emerging economies, right? And the other one is for sure the book of Al Gore, right? China. That's the China soy production, last years, last decades. The Brazilian soy production, and the Chinese pig production. So that's more or less the logic. Now, I'm not saying that all the soybean of Brazil is going to be pig, but a lot of dynamics of the recent dynamics of the natural resources are to feed animals. We're talking about protein. We are basically talking about the proteic chain. We're talking about beef and soybean. We're talking about animal and vegetable protein, right? So that's the logic. You can live with this for a few years, right? But that's not a long-term policy, right? We're not going to destroy the Amazon to feed pigs in China or to feed Russians with beef, because that's the idea. So climate change. This is the preferred slide of my CEO, so Bruce can so that's the preferred one of Carter, right? And it's quite nice about climate change. It takes a while. And that's Brazil is here now, 8 million square kilometers, and U.S. is probably here. That's just an illustration of the climate change, based on the size of the Arctic Sea. Okay, and climate change is a threat. Everybody said that. But it's also an opportunity for the Amazon, right? It's a threat, and at the same time, it's an opportunity. It depends on us. Bolster the value and mega investments. That's probably the toughest question that I have. And to answer this question, I use my alethiometer. I don't know, I hope you know what an alethiometer is, right? It's also called golden compass. A alethiometer is a truth-telling or future-telling device that's able to answer questions formed in the mind of the user. So it's all about symbols. You have these 3 pointers. You put your questions in the red pointers, and the blue pointer moves it and gives you the answer, right? So I use my alethiometer to answer this question. My first thought was respect to the diversity heritage. Land use more productive, right? More heads per hectare, like Tim was saying. Value added. Well, that was another point of Tim's. And sustainability of traditional products and services. That was my first thought. My second thought was innovation. Sound information and knowledge investments. I think $2 billion in 10 years is nothing, right? The Amazon has less than 3-digit PhDs. The whole Brazilian Amazon has less than 3-digit PhDs. Any pharmaceutical company has 3-4 times more. Novartis has 3,000, 3 times the whole Amazon, the whole Brazilian Amazon. I'm not sure if there is a healing solution in the Amazon, but with less than 1,000 PhDs for a huge area and for a huge biodiversity, is like a drop in the ocean, right? So we need much more than that. We need excellent centers, and I think I agree mostly with what Carlos was saying. We need excellent centers. We need to put a lot of money in this ITAs. It's a very similar idea. And do networking, right? That was my third thought. My third is related to the planet, right? We have to look for the evaluating environmental service, payment for environmental service. We have to look at incentives to reduce emissions from deforestation and degradation, the so-called RED. And I have also this thought of rainfall parks, which is part of our strategy, right? These 3 thoughts are my thoughts for bolstering the value of the Amazon. So that was my question to the golden compass. And the answer, which takes time, is global attention. I saw a lot of global attention. I saw principles. I'm looking at the future. I use it for future telling. I saw a lot of principles. I saw good practices from planning, from preparing, from implementing, from monitoring. not good practices in policies or safeguard policies. Safeguard policies are great, you know. The problem is that on the ground there is nothing new. It's always business as usual, right? Take any case, any road that was financed in the last years. They were greatly prepared by IDB, CAF, or World Bank, or whoever. But nothing happens on the ground. You know, the implementation is poor. Sound and environmental industry criteria. I think companies should step forward and be responsible also for the Amazon, if they want to be in the Amazon, if they want to take advantage of the Amazon, right, or be there, or they have long-term futures to the Amazon, they should be responsible. So from now on, I'm going to talk about infrastructure. We heard about IIRSA. I'm not going to talk about IIRSA anymore. And when I say mega investments, it's because it's mega investments. You know, we're not talking about only infrastructure. We're talking about mega investments. We are talking about this, what Jim says, a perfect storm. It's a set of investments. It's not only one. It's the beginning of a series of investments. Look at the energy, oil and gas in Peru, July 2005. That's the Amazon, Peruvian Amazon, right? Green is not good for us in this case. It's very bad. Green means contracts, blocks with contracts. So the greener, for us, in this case, the worse. August 2006, November 2007. More than 60 blocks. 70% of the Peruvian Amazon blocked for oil and gas. Is this a smart decision for the future? Has anybody studied this strategically, the energy matrix of Peru? What's going to happen in 20, 30 years? So commitments are being made without evaluating cumulative impacts, evaluating the future value of the Amazon. Because this is not for the Amazon. The Amazon doesn't need all this oil and gas, right? It's the classical utilitarian scenario of Jim, right? Brazil, energy, hydropower in Brazil. That's the Brazilian PAC, the Brazilian Acceleration Program, which is big, much as big as IIRSA, only for Brazil. These are feasibility technical studies and economic and technical studies and impact studies of all hydropower potential in Brazil that will be ready to 2010. 2/3 of the hydropower potential in Brazil will come from the Amazon. In the next, till 2030, in the next 30 years. So we are talking about 25,000 megawatts of dams being studied in the Amazon, in the Brazilian Amazon. And new rivers to be studied, we are talking about 33,000 megawatts. So we're not talking about projects, we're talking about policies, huge policies to exploit natural resources in the Amazon. Not for the Amazon, from the Amazon. So what we are talking about? We're talking about an utilitarian scenario that's not for the Amazon. The Amazon doesn't need all this energy. The Madeira dams, 10% of the energy that will generate by the Madeira dams will be more than enough for Rondônia and Acre. 90% will be transported to São Paulo, Rio, to the national grid. So who is benefiting from the Madeira dams? Maybe Rondônia for a few years when the construction is on, in a very chaotic scenario, right? Look at Rondônia. No? It's a karmic state in Brazil. No? Sorry if you're from Rondônia. I hope not. Which, by the way, has the best land planning of the world, right? Costed $50 million, right? Long-term national sector policy commitments, that's what we're talking about. We're committing the Amazon in the long term. Without looking at the cumulative impacts, without looking at inducing impacts. 2 months ago, there were 10. Aaron knows that. 3 months ago, there were 10 EIAs for blocks in the Amazon. For oil blocks in Peru, 10 EIAs within the Ministry of Energy at the same time. And some of them were cut and paste of the others, you know. So the government was looking at the same study 10 times, you know. It was done almost by the same company, all of them. Is this a way to look at the future? Look 10 times the same document and approve it 10 times for 10 different places? So that's the way it is. No? Induced and cumulative impacts. That's why I think Rondônia has this problem. That's the Rondônia highway system and the Rondônia deforestation. And I think Carlos talked about that. So there is 100% correlation between roads and deforestation. That's the worst case scenario. It was combined with colonization. 30% of the Rondônia state was destroyed in 10 years, and 700,000 people came in 10 years, in a decade. 700,000 people. Double the population of Rondônia in 10 years. And now we're expecting 100,000 people coming in just for the Madeira dams. And by the way, deforestation in Rondônia is up 600% before the Madeira dams starts, just for speculation. It's time to grab land. No? Plan investment in waterways. When I read Jim's work, I liked very much the idea of cargo by water, right? I did a work that was presented here about the potential to use waterways in the Amazon. We have over 15,000 miles of navigable rivers in the Amazon, but they are not part of the public policy, as you see. As you can see, these are investments for 2007, 2000 Brazil in different roads, railroads, ports, airports, waterways. Nothing. Nobody cares. There is no, I don't know if it's a problem of economical push, but there is no interest. And you're going to build a road, or you're going to pave a road, the BR-319, from Porto Velho, Manaus, who is parallel to the river. A river that's Madeira River, that is quite good for cargo. It's being used by soybean, and there is no signal, there is no security, there is no support service along the waterway. It's not a big cost, it's not a big investment. But look at in 4 years, Brazil wants to invest 700 million reais, which means $80 million a year. That for the whole country includes the Prata River, includes the San Francisco waterway, includes all of the, so imagine in the Amazon with 20,000 kilometers. So there is no public interest, there is no interest for waterways. And the Madeira complex. The Madeira complex, I don't know if you know, the project is, as it is in IIRSA, and it was initially planned. We are talking about 4 dams in the Madeira Basin, 2 in Brazil, 1 binational, 1 100% Bolivian. This is the area of induced impacts that you can find in the study commissioned by Furnas and Odebrecht. So the company did the study and said, that's the potential area of induced impacts from the investment. And these numbers, they represent types of, it's a typology, you know, how to say, typology of regions, right? Types of regions. So there was a strategic environmental analysis. There was a good assessment of induced impacts, of cumulative impacts. That's the area that was subject to study. I don't know if everybody can see. In the EIA, in the Environment Impact Assessment, is less than, this is Porto Velho, the municipality of Porto Velho. So it's less than the municipality of Porto Velho, a little more. It goes a little down along the river. So at the time you come into the implementation process, the plans seem to be forgotten. You know, now that we're going to go for the project, forget what we said. And I remember Fernando Henrique said that, forget everything I said before becoming president. So it seems that the promoters do the same. Forget everything I said about the project. Now, let's go on for the EIA as simple as we can. So let's diminish.
Wrote, not said.
Huh?
He said, I wrote.
Everything that I wrote. Yeah. And he wrote a lot, by the way. So, discussion points. That's my. We need smarter alternatives to the sector policy. We need investments in conservation, other renewable sources, other transportation modes, waterways. It might be more friendly, more environmentally friendly to use waterways. It's the way the British did 100 years ago. Now, if you look at the rubber cycle, the Amazon was one of the most important export areas in the world. Manaus was, where's Francisco? Francisco told me, I learned from Francisco, Manaus was the first city in South America to have electrical energy. So there was some glamour in Amazon during the rubber cycle. It was all based in river transportation. The British made a lot of money just transporting. They had never stepped into the forest. They were just doing the business, the logistics. So we need smarter alternatives that take into account, I think you proposed, and take into account the future cost of carbon. No? We need a common understanding of long-term conservation targets which adequately incorporate this potential future. If we don't think in the future value of the Amazon, if you don't incorporate the carbon discussion, the carbon value, I don't think it's worth to thinking deforestation zero, right? Attention to long-term programs and cumulative impacts. Once we have these long-term conservation targets, I don't know if we can do this. This has to be discussed. I think we should define go and no-go rivers. We should have a policy. We should. It is the point to discuss policies, not projects. Let's discuss the 60 blocks in the Peruvian Amazon, the 60 dams to be built in Brazil, the dozens of roads. Let's discuss the policy. What's the best policy for the Amazon? That's my idea. Any goal project should be preceded by the implementation of precautionary, preparatory, locally agreed measures. We need to prepare the region to receive the project, the investment. If you're going to invest in Rondônia, twice what they produce the whole year. Now, the GDP of Rondônia is 1/3 of the size of the dams. You know, so it's not possible that Rondônia will deal with this investment. You cannot receive, you cannot double your product in 1 year and take it cool. No? It cannot be a cool way to double your product in 3 years. No? Every year in 3 years. So we need to strengthen local institutions. We need to respect cultural values. And we need land use peace. No? I'm not against land use planning. I'm against because it's not implemented. But we need to consolidate protected areas, community reserves, sustainable areas. I don't know how to call this. I'm calling it, for me, it's land titling, and land planning, implemented land planning, or at least consolidating the areas of special use, how IIRSA calls this. And finally, if the final objective is regional sustainable and equitable development, infra projects must be combined with other relevant investments. I'm just going to show 2 cases, and that's it. My first case is the BR-163. They built this idea of a district, an area that will be the same idea that was in the Madeira dams. No? Let's see the area that will be indirectly impacted or induce the impacts from the road development. And they have consolidated protected areas. They have consolidated indigenous territories. They have created sustainable uses areas. And then it's time to go with the road, right? Just for sustainable use, they create 5 million hectares. It took too long. It was a 4-year process. We have to be able to do this faster. It was a long process. It was supported by Moore and done by IPAN, by NGO, so it took too long, but we should be able to do the same. For me, it's a very good case. It's a very smart case. How we finance this? One idea could be use red in this ALAP. This is called in Brazil ALAP. It's an area of a temporary management. So the Minister of Environment has the power to do the management of this area for some time. And that's the time they have to prepare the region for the infrastructure. It's called ALAP in the Brazilian legal framework. And I'm wondering if we can reduce emissions in these LLAPs. So if we're going to build the road with good practices, why not pay for this? Why not give the incentive to do this? It's an idea, right? People think, hey, it's not going to work because of the leakage. Okay, leakage. Leakage may not work as well. So strategic planning of Acre. When I saw this, I said, yeah, that's it. Somebody's doing. It's not impossible. This is a road. And these are all the investments that Acre wants to do along with the road. We're talking about industrial parks, sustainable forests, agro-industry, housing, water, tourism, government influence combined, science and technology. So it's possible to do it. We have to combine all the dimensions on the territory. That's the idea probably of what Jim says, the IIRSA should be visionary in all aspects. If IIRSA could promote all these investments along a project, then we might be better off, right? And we have room for everybody. We have budget funds, BNDES, the Brazilian Housing Bank, private sector, the federal budget, IGB, World Bank. And in this case, infrastructure is 60% of the investment, and all other investments are 40%. So it seems reasonable. No? And that's not different from the idea probably of the World Bank when they put together infrastructure and environment. Why they put together, and I think the IGB did the same. No? If you put together environment and infrastructure, it's to promote investments and more equilibrated interventions at the ground, on the ground, right? So that's it. If you do this, so that's the Acre example. And with this, I finish. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pedro. I'd like to remember that at 6 p.m., 2 hours from now, it will be the opening of the exhibition 40 Amazon photography, 40 pictures. We have in a couple of minutes, we will be beginning our last panel before the opening of the exhibition. We are all invited to see the amazing photographies. Well, we are ready to take questions on the tipping points and proposals of Carlos Nobre and on all the provocations of WWF. I think a good idea is each one to identify yourself, please, and take a microphone which is available in the just right there.
U.S. Government Accountability Office. This question is for Pedro Barra. You had mentioned that with regard to safeguard policies, they're great in theory, but they're very poorly implemented. I was wondering if you could comment if there's any difference between implementation of these policies on the part of the World Bank, for example, versus the IDB, and if there's any, well, they're recent, but if there's any implementation by other institutions of the so-called equator principles. Thank you.
Go. Yeah. Thank you. I don't know from the World Bank. Yeah. They don't have, recently they haven't done much in Brazil. They're supporting the Madeira dams, but technically speaking, not financially. IGB has good standards, safeguards, but in the corridor norte in Bolivia, they spent 2 years and I think $1 million doing an SCA. At the very end, the governor of Bolivia said, I don't want. And they said, okay, so it's always this case. No? It's tough. No? CAFI had this experience in the interoceanic. I was part of the team. There's a problem of governance. There's a problem of ownership. I think ownership is key to implement social and environmental actions in parallel with. But I think the CAF in Grena is going well, and I think Odebrecht is going to present. Odebrecht is putting some money with CI on the top of. So in the Interoceanic has two programs, one from CAF in Grena, the other from Odebrecht, but they are still very small, but they are good steps forward. They present together $30 million in a $1 billion investment. So we are 3% for social and environment and 97% for infrastructure. So we are still unbalanced. And the best case is 163. No bank was involved. Was no. Sorry. No, even the Brazilian bank was not involved. No, I'm not talking about IGB or CAF. I'm talking about our BNDES. They said, no, we don't want. They didn't want. It was done by this NGO, IPAN. And so it's okay. The only problem, it took too long, 4 years. But it was the best case. No, as you see, having a good standards and good safeguards could mean nothing. And having no standards, but having the political will, like in the case of the 163, there was a political will to do it. So the political will is probably the key. And so how we can push the political will? Maybe through the companies, through the developers, transforming them in developers, not only contractors, not only oil companies, but oil companies that care about people, care about the environment. So that's my pitch. It's what we called in WWF market transformation.
Okay, Pedro, thank you very much. Let's remember that our next session will address important topics on infrastructure projects, where people from Odebrecht, from International Finance Corporation, from World Bank Group, will be, among others, will be here to debate. So let's take the questions brief to allow us to take all of them and make a 10 minutes break before coming to the next session, please.
Thank you. I'm Jed Schilling, and the question is for Dr. Nobre. The model is very interesting with a very complex set of issues. Does it permit you to look at what the impacts are going to be of the different scenarios in the Amazon on, say, the rest of Latin America? Would it change rainfall in Argentina or Chile? Would it affect was it Pino? El Nino, and those kinds of things? And what would the effects be of going to your more savanna-like scenario?
Most of the impacts in these scenarios, in these model calculations, are really over the Amazon. There is a lot of talk, and we've seen Tom Lovejoy this morning and many other people are saying the rainfall over southern Brazil, Argentina, depends on the Amazon forest. And let's say that's a possibility. That's not proved. I think we cannot say for sure to what extent rainfall over the La Plata Basin in eastern South America is controlled by evapotranspiration in the Amazon. Many people, including my own research group, we are doing research on that topic, which is very exciting, very important. However, there is global warming, and there is, all IPCC models show an increase in rainfall over the La Plata Basin due to global warming. So one has to be careful in drawing conclusions, only based on deforestation. So even if deforestation changes the southward flow of moisture from the Amazon into the La Plata Basin, one has to also think that global warming is happening simultaneously. So it's a very complex issue, it's a very difficult issue to deal with. So in Brazil, I debate a lot with my colleagues mostly from the Amazon, because they try to see impacts of Amazon deforestation outside of the Amazon, which is fair, fine, and they see less importance in looking at things that will change within the Amazon. And I have the opposite view. I think most impacts will be very close to the source in the Amazon, and we should pay a lot of attention over those things. Not discounting, of course, there may be global impacts. We have many studies showing that the Amazon deforestation may change weather patterns in North America, in Africa, in Europe, but still they're very tentative, and one cannot draw a firm conclusion on that. El Niños. There is now new studies, brand new studies, basically showing that there is a little bit of an interplay between Amazon and El Niños. We knew for a long time that strong El Niños cause droughts over central eastern Amazon. This is well-known fact, established. We understand why, we understand everything. Apparently, if you deforest the Amazon, then that also affects the Pacific Basin in ways that still we're trying to understand. More importantly, I think, is to say that with some uncertainty, and a warmer planet will have at least more frequent mega El Niños. Those types of El Niños that affect a lot, U.S. as well, West Coast, California, and South America. So those will become, we don't know if there will be many more El Niños, more frequent El Niños, but the mega El Niños will become more frequent.
Carlos, I have a quick question to you on that. Defining and by consequence becoming public tipping points would be more a good thing or a bad thing? A good thing since you create a consciousness on that, or a bad thing since you create a limit to make some people sometimes feeling more comfortable because we are far from that or not. You know what I mean? How do you see that as a scientist?
That's a philosophical and ethical question, which is very critical, in fact, not only for the Amazon, it's for the planet. Steering the Earth system. We will have to steer the Earth system, to manage the Earth system, we will have to discuss profoundly the very same question you're posing. And I will give a very simple example, not related to the Amazon. Let's say that in 20 years' time, the science of understanding Greenland ice sheets become robust enough, and then there will be a projection that the ice sheets will slide down into the ocean, and the sea level rise will rise 4 meters over 200 years. What I'm saying is not out of my mind. This is really what IPCC is saying that might happen. So I'm not saying the projection is there. I'm just hypothetically posing the question. If science is able to make with uncertainty, but that kind of projection, then how we manage the Earth system? This is a very, very, I don't think anybody has the answer. Emergency, contingency plans, plan B. Once there is one threshold, a tipping point is crossed, and the tipping point of the Earth system, which may have tremendous consequences. Pedro showed that nice film on the Arctic ice, and that's dramatic. And so what do? We just say, okay, a tipping point has been crossed. There is nothing we can do. So what's the point of mitigating climate change? This is an extremist view. So what do? But certainly you have to manage the Earth system. We are going to be facing those questions more and more. And the point is we lack the institutions in the world. The United Nations is not, as yet at least, the institution to deal with that type of problem.
I think 2 final questions before a 10-minute break.
Thank you.
And we go to the last session.
My name is Roger.
Gentlemen, please.
My name is Roger Hamilton.
This is for Carlos. You talked about the need to add value to the natural forests to prevent deforestation. At the end of Pedro's talk, he showed a map of Acre, and the government of Acre has been pursuing a very innovative program which they call Florestania. And I was wondering what your opinion is of what they've been doing and the extent to which it could be a model for other areas in the Amazon.
Yeah, I had this, very briefly, I had this major disappointment. I was last November in Acre after many years. And then went to have breakfast in the hotel. And, believe it or not, in the breakfast in a hotel in Acre, there was not one tropical fruit in the Amazon served. So, with all due respect to the governor, which I really admire, and Marina Silves from Acre, I think it's a lot of talk and not so much implementation. So it's a nice, beautiful concept, powerful concept. But in practice, the implementation of the concept, is moving much more in terms of the known things, like cattle ranching is increasing a lot in Acre. No problem with that, but So I like the concept. I think that should be really something useful as a pilot project. But unfortunately, it seems that the globalization wave is reaching Acre the other way around. It's the rest of Brazil, the rest of the world influencing habits, lifestyles, and the more traditional values, including fooding habits in that region, are being lost. So, but again, I like the concept, and I think that we should, and also the international system, the banking system, should look carefully at that example and support it. I think we have to try to develop that concept.
And people told me that morning you took a Diet Coke in Acre. I'm kidding. Sorry. Please, gentlemen, for the final question. Please. I'm just kidding, too. Just to keep the audience alive. But it's not impossible.
Stuart Grudgings with Reuters. Carlos, you said there'd been an explosion of deforestation over the last 4 months, I think you said. Does that lead you to believe that the recent improvement or the decrease in deforestation is a blip in the last few years, and we're now seeing a return to higher rates of deforestation that perhaps we haven't seen since the 90s? And does it lead you to, does it give you any projections for what the rate may be for this year?
Yeah, we cannot tell about projections as yet. However, it's a worrisome trend. Not that we'll reach in 2008 the levels of, let's say, 2004. I don't think so. We are far from that. But still, I mean, the last few years, the gross domestic product of the Amazon was pretty much stable because, as I said, it comes very little from the rural sector. It comes from minerals, from Zona Franca de Manaus. And so the deforestation was declining rapidly, and still the Amazon was working. I mean, it's no big deal. The soy farmers were losing money, and they did what all farmers in the world do. They go to government, they ask for debt forgiveness, and they got $1 billion of subsidies for their debt. So everything was moving as you planned. So there is no reason to expect that there is a very high correlation between deforestation and growth. It has, of course, at a macroeconomy scale. I mean, people taking opportunities, seizing the opportunities of opening up. And there's a recent work by Amigos da Terra, Friends of the Earth, a Brazilian section, and they study cattle. And they concluded very simply what we knew for 30 years. It gives much more work to a cattle rancher to keep the same area as productive pastures as just going and expanding and deforesting. So it's out of laziness, out of the simplest way of making some money. So all those drivers of change are there. I mean, the 3 years of reduced deforestation, 2005, 6, and 7, they did not bring by themselves a cure for illegal deforestation. And that word was not much mentioned, but we have to remember that 70% minimum of deforestation in Brazil and Amazon. I don't know the figures for Bolivia, but in Brazil it's illegal. And timber is more like 90%. So anyway, I think the drivers are there, and the only way to counter that, well, there are 2 ways. One is very slow educational process, and that's going on. I mean, if you see even the children of the cattle ranchers, they are much more concerned about the environment. They see on TV global warming, deforestation. Rede Globo in Brazil, you know, is a frequent subject for Rede Globo, and they show the devastation. So the children are changing, but that will take perhaps another generation. But the other thing is really law enforcement. I mean, law enforcement is the only way to sustain, to decrease deforestation for 10 years until we have a better idea what to do. So, I mean, I don't have any expectations that deforestation will be down, declining for a long time. But I think, you know, this last 4 months is a big warning for government, and now they are all concerned, and they are sending, they are doing more law enforcement. And but I have to tell you, it's going to be much higher than 2007.
Well, let's thank Pedro Barra and Carlos Nobre, and thank you very much. Well, Paulo is asking us to make the break as short as